fifth interview, fifth edition of Quarantine of Paradise. And today, my guest is very thoughtful and very interesting composer, Hickey, who is also a vice president of Naxos in America, the label which many of you know. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. I know you are joining me from all the way from New York. So how is it? How is it out there?
Well, today it's a bright sunny day. It looks like I haven't been outside yet, actually. The weather is good, but New York is certainly a changed place over the last 2 to 3 months here, and it's a pretty bleak city right now. I mean, I've lived here for 20 years, and I've witnessed a lot, of course, in that time. But this time of COVID, with so many who haven't come out the other side of this, and it seems like everybody knows someone. It's a very, very bleak time. The city is very quiet. Normally right now you might hear some noises of the garbage trucks and traffic and kids going to school and a lot of things, and we just don't have that right now. Actually, nature has kind of returned to New York. The birds are really plentiful now. It's quite interesting to see. We happen to live just a block from the harbor, a block from the ocean, so we have a lot of seabirds in that. And it's very interesting if there is an upside to everything.
Yeah, I actually got woken up the other day by birds. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the sound was so interesting that I actually wanted to record it, but I was still kind of half asleep, so I didn't. But that's true. I guess that's only, one or a few upside of the situation, because in London, it's also not very, very good situation. But when I was reading about you, I was really impressed and by the fact that you said that one of the pieces of music, I think your concerto, you wrote in 20 while you've been moving between about 20 or 24 places, something like that. Is that true?
Not moving to live, but moving and travel and all of that. I travel a lot for work, for my music as well, but for my other job too. And it's just kind of the nature of composing music with life that has a lot of demands with family and work and professional obligations and things like that. And when I was 22 years old, I could sit at my piano on a Saturday with a giant cup of tea and just kind of work on a string quartet for, 5, 6, 7 hours at a time or whatever. And I haven't worked in that way in a long time. So I've just found ways over, a life of writing music of, breaking my work into smaller segments and working wherever I can, even while traveling planes and trains and wherever. So I've written a lot of music that way.
That's incredible, because I think many of our viewers think that to write music you need to be actually next to the instrument or next to your setup. And they would, because people often ask me as well, how do you I once composed a piece on Eurostar, but that's an incredible. I don't think everyone has this quality. Not everyone has ability to write music away from their instrument. So it's quite a unique quality.
Yeah, I don't really prefer it necessarily. And I really like to, behind me here, I've got my piano, which is where I prefer to work. It's kind of necessity, when you're traveling a lot, and that's often when I'm traveling and an inopportune time when I have an opportune idea. So you obviously, you're a composer too, if you're on the Eurostar and the spirit moves you, you want to, you want to try to make something of that. And I do too. But I really test out nearly everything I write when I get back to a piano or back home. I really do.
Right. So now in the current situation, it is a quarantine, but is it a little bit of a paradise from that point of view? Because you are actually in your studio?
Well, I guess in a way it is. There is probably an upside to things in that, many of us composers don't necessarily, at least at the sort of gestation stage, don't work collaboratively. We work alone. Mm-hmm. in that regard, quarantine means I am at home and I'm not traveling, and some of the obligations that I would have, I normally would take 2 to 3 trips a month on average, obviously aren't happening now. We're not commuting anywhere, and I haven't been on the subway, and gosh, it must be 2 months now, really. So yeah, I mean, there is the benefit of being at home and, taking a good look at one's work. I'm going back and editing some older pieces now. And most importantly for me, I'm trying to finish if I can, this mammoth piano piece I've been working on for some time. And this has allowed me to do it, I think, maybe a little more without distraction, which has been nice.
Fantastic. Now, I'm very curious. Can I ask you about this piece, actually? Because it was mentioned in one of the interviews, and this is based on Hiromi's colossal work about Sapiens, about history of the humankind, starting from the very, very beginning and sort of going through centuries up to the modern times. Is that
right? Yeah, it's true. Through the millennia, actually, yeah.
Incredible. And first of all, what has drawn you to this publication and to not just to read, but actually to manifest it in music?
Well, if you've read the book, for anyone who's read the book, this is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari, who's a brilliant mind. That's his first published book and a huge bestseller, arguably one of the best-selling nonfiction books of the 21st century, if not the best-selling. Huge impact on the world for anyone who read it. And he took the very, very bold ethnographic and yet, really forward-looking, forward-thinking, and daring look at the history of us, from our origins as we split from our ancestors up to the present day. And it's not the only book he's written. There's a follow-up to it, Homo Deus, which is Brief History of the 21st Century, which is a little bit bleak, I have to say, but also very, very provocative. But Sapiens, when I read it, I mean, it's just one of those books that you can read 2-3 pages at a time, and you almost just have to set it down. There's so much to think about, and so many decisions that our species made at various points in history, and from the cognitive revolution to the development of our currently sized brain, which is still in the stage of metamorphosis, transformation, of course, the agricultural revolution, to all these signposts throughout history that have allowed the human species to survive and relatively thrive, with a lot of caveats to that, whereas other species have not. And it is a fascinating, thought-provoking book, and I've asked the author and publisher for permission to write a piece of music inspired by the book. Now, there would be no earthly way, frankly, to make some sort of tone poem on a book of this nature and a subject that big. But my particular piece was a commissioned work, and it's a large piece for solo piano, cut into 8 sections. And, each of the sections really kind of concentrates on some of the concepts mentioned in the book, and, draws some inspiration from different sections of the book and different signposts throughout, our life as humans in the world over these tens of millions of years. And so that's kind of the update. I'm hoping to finish this piece probably within a month or 2. I've been working on it for over a year. And I'm really excited about it. We have the blessing of the author, who's become an enormous celebrity, lectures all over the world. He's an Oxford Fellow there in the UK. He's based in Israel, and he's constantly lecturing and writing, and he's quite an inspiration.
Incredible. Well, we are all looking forward to hearing the piece, and maybe when it's released, we can even put a link underneath this video, because I'm very intrigued, especially about the end. What kind of don't tell me, but what kind of end how you're gonna finish it?
Yeah, I'm worrying about that too.
But do you think that as a composer or artist, let's just look at the composer first as an artist in a bigger sense. Obviously, when we deal with art, because some people say, oh, if you're an artist, you just need to be more preoccupied with art, with the beauty, with the more kind of intellectual concepts, but don't really attribute it so much to reality. And then there is another camp who think that the actually artists are those who move the society, who represent the society, who influence the society, and therefore it's almost like, if you like, a moral obligation of the artist to express his or her views. So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I have a take on, what I personally wish to do and feel is certainly part of my compositional and human makeup. But I don't wish to make any sort of blanket judgment on composers or artists anywhere in any field, regardless of what they're working in, as to what they wish to do. Most people who, work in the arts or, creative endeavors at all, do it because they can't really imagine life doing anything else or not doing it. And I'm very much that way. Sometimes I, ask myself, especially in the midst of very, very busy times and stressful and trying times like this, why do I do what I do? Well, as soon as I stopped doing it, I realized that that's just not something that that works for me. And in order for me to, best and most effectively express myself as a human, I have to be expressing, and I have to, continually go back to working on what I'm working on, a musician. And I became a musician when I was 12, and all these decades later, I still am. And I feel that I can, turn it off any easier than I could turn off breathing, for me. As far as, moral obligation and duty and all of that stuff, I mean, I've certainly, in the midst of the past few years, given a situation that some would call, say it's a, political situation or something like that, as if politics matters in 2020. It doesn't. It's not politics. It's life, it's death, it's the existence of our, shared humanity. And all of that is being assailed right now. And my role as an artist, if I have a role, is to at least shine a light on some degrees of, despair that exists in the world, and maybe point some small way forward in the areas of hope. It is entirely what I wish to do as a musician. I kind of look back some of my earlier work, and I'm a writer too, but even earlier writings, and think of some of the things I did when I was younger, and that it certainly may have suited my 5-year-old brain or whatever it was when I did them, but they don't have, they're not as meaningful and important to me now in a world that I want to make better for my child. And in order to do that, I mean, I think we as artists, or at least I as an artist, need to be taking and looking at some of these harder questions as to, what is the society that we want to have? I've been absolutely positively blessed. I'm privileged beyond measure, as especially here in my broken country, as a white middle-class male born in 1970, with all of the privileges and opportunities that my parents gave me and that society gives me now. But there's a lot of people that are suffering. And to any small extent, any small way that I can help, address or alleviate anyone's suffering, I'll take that on to some degree in music.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I can relate to that because last year I actually released album Babylon, and it was kind of my take on what was happening in the UK, because UK was very much divided. And somehow this Babylon, which is basically a tune now of the main track on all this series, became a a theme throughout this year, and we don't see the end of it in such a way. But yeah, I think, but I used to be very non-political. And then at some point I felt that you kind of get, and maybe it comes also with the age, but also you get drawn in because that's now on your doorstep. The results, the impact on well-being of your family, of your friends, of
Right.
many things.
I agree. I mean, it ceases being, you say you were not political. Well, it stopped being politics when it crossed your doorstep, right? It's impacting your friends and family and all these decisions that hit so many people. And I mean, it also, I feel a pretty, maybe not overwhelming, but, pretty regular sense of shame and guilt that the politics that crossed my doorstep, especially in November 8th, 2016, really has crossed a lot of other people's doorsteps a lot earlier. I mean, they've been victims of politics, whether it's racial profiling or of the issues of gender that we're dealing with in my country and yours. What the right wishes to call culture wars, and what the left wants to call just living a life, a life that's valued and worthy. Those are things that crossed a lot of thresholds, maybe earlier than mine, maybe earlier than yours. And that's why I say this isn't politics. It's not politics at all. It's just something that impacts our lives. And if we want to, help others and alleviate suffering in some way, these are some of the small ways we can do is to, share a bit of our art with the world.
Well, coming back to the art, so you've been very fruitful this year. You had 2 releases. One is just recently, I think, in the end of April. Could you tell us more about it?
Sure. That particular piece was a commission from a wonderful Basel-based group based in Basel, Switzerland. The group is called Trio Eclipse. And wonderful young ensemble, clarinet, cello, and piano, kind of an interesting combination. There's not a ton of repertoire for that particular combination, but they wanted to commission some new works from composers. I was one of them. And it really kind of came together wonderfully. A year and a half ago, they commissioned a piece for me that had been inspired by several trips that I've taken to Berlin, called Tiergarten, and after the park in the center of that city. And my particular piece, it's one of those pieces where I kind of done a fair amount of sketching in Berlin and elsewhere over the years, and I kind of was obsessed in a way with some of Berlin's contribution to musical and artistic culture over time. And of course, just like New York or London, it's almost incalculable to, even make an attempt. Certain things that I love about the city, which I find really, really magical. And a lot of it is the fact that that city is really, really more than anywhere else practically full of ghosts. And a lot of those ghosts are found in the music of the city. So my particular trio was, really inspired by some of the music associated with Berlin. And, though it's an original piece and it comes in very different sections, and there's even some quotations from other things that are very much buried in there. There's some a little less, there's some a little less overt quotations in there, including the trio of David Bowie albums that were recorded in Berlin in the late 70s. And a lot of other things in there. So Trio Eclipse commissioned the piece, gave the premiere, several performances in Switzerland back last fall. We rehearsed it in Basel in October, which was great. I did some teaching in Austria in that month, and I got to see them beforehand, and then they recorded it, and it's just released just 2 weeks ago. And you can check it out anywhere you like. The group is called Trio Eclipse, and the recording is called Spheres.
Yes, we will put a link underneath this video. I mean, I listened to it. I loved it. And
Right.
That made me think about, again, coming back to this question, which is, of course, is kind of almost a cliche question about why classical music is not so popular these days, but I would actually take it further. I would say contemporary classical music is almost unknown to people who are not into like nerds into contemporary music. My understanding, my theory, I mean, who knows? My theory is that in the media at the moment, all the sounds we hear, majority of advertising and even in the cinema, but maybe like advertising on television, is the use of electronic sounds. It's a lot of electronic sounds. And the second is kind of very simplified tunes and simplified melodies. And therefore, people don't have even access. People are not exposed to something, which is what we would call contemporary classical music. So maybe that's one of the reasons why it is not so popular. I mean, what would you say?
Well, I would say that, I've got a lot to say on that topic, because in one way I agree with you very much. It's not so popular, and that, people that are doing the work that composers do in writing, say, contemporary instrumental pieces like Tiergarten, are at a disadvantage in that, instrumental music is going to be very hard for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, music is a song. And this form that kind of developed out of Mitteleuropa in the early 19th century is now kind of the form that we've adopted for all of the 20th, 21st centuries to communicate so much. And it's not necessarily a form that all musicians work in. We might work in. I certainly have written lots of songs over the time. But, contemporary instrumental music is something that, requires one thing and one thing only from a listener. It's not a PhD. It's not you don't have to go to 20 concerts every month to learn about it. It asks one thing of you, and that's your time. And time is not something that people have a lot of or feel they have a lot of. And in a, increasingly digital world where everybody's on their device every day, pecking away with their thumbs, what does a 10-minute or an hour-long piece of instrumental music or even dramatic music mean to a lot of people? It's asking a lot. And in order to really kind of, break through and break into people, you have to do, one has to do all one can to really, emphasize the fact that, I am asking of you something that's very private, very personal, and that's your time. However, we contrast all of that with the ways and methods in which we consume music, which is my obsession and my other job. And that's the fact that, we live in a time where there's never been an opportunity to access music as quickly and simply and easily as at any point in the past. And it doesn't matter what your interests are, in a nanosecond, you can be pulling up something that you've never heard before, or you could explore some band that you may have read about but never listened to, your friend told you about, or maybe you haven't explored old-timey banjo music or the music of Anton Webern or whatever. In seconds, you can be educating yourself on all of those things. You've never had that before. And because of that, especially the younger generation, people, the kids up to about age 20 to 24 have lived in a world where genre doesn't matter. And that the delineations between genre, you mentioned advertising and that a lot of people come to classical music through advertising. I came to classical music because I heard it on cartoons, Bugs Bunny.
Oh, wow.
And then I went to a concert with the Chicago Symphony that really changed my life because it was just a spectacular concert and a spectacular piece. But my point is, a lot of people, if they do come to classical music, might come through it from other ways. I happen to come to it from cartoons, and then hearing some of the maybe more risk-taking esoteric pieces of music like The Rite of Spring, from listening to King Crimson and Frank Zappa and David Bowie, a lot of progressive music before that, as opposed to whatever, hearing Vivaldi's Four Seasons and thinking that's a very lovely piece of music. Nowadays, kids are, spending time on their devices, listening to music on the platforms, and they're discovering a lot of work on those platforms that they would not have been able to discover when they went into, say, the HMV on Oxford Street, and they went into that giant place, and in the back are those two glass doors, and that's the classical room. Glass doors, there's that creepy guy with the mustard stains on his shirt or whatever, filing CDs away, and looked at those glass doors and they turned the other way and they never went in, because classical music was always looked at as, something very different, very other, very intimidating. And nowadays that intimidation is not there. In fact, more people are diving in and learning about classical music than at any point in history. And many of those people aren't people like you or me who are practitioners and are musicians. Many of them are just casual listeners. And many of them are just wanting classical music for an occasion, to study perhaps, or to make breakfast, or to do yoga or sleep. And those are all, good possibilities from a market perspective for the work that we do.
True. I actually wanted to ask you about Naxos, because my personal experience as a consumer with Naxos was when I was a student. And of course, we were buying CDs, and CDs were very expensive. And I remember how happy I was to discover CDs which cost much less and had the same performance, the same quality materials, pieces, operas, piano repertoire. And so that was my introduction to Naxos. And so what is Naxos today?
Naxos today is a global music group. We're a Hong Kong-based, Hong Kong-founded company, now 34 years old. We are a music group of owned and distributed label content. Our owned labels include the Naxos label, but many others: Grand Piano, Dynamic, Marco Polo, Ondine, Capriccio, and on, SWR. And in addition to that, we also distribute several hundred labels digitally throughout the globe and physically in various countries. I work for the American company and handle a lot of aspects of sales and business development for the company. But it's important to delineate between Naxos, the record label, and Naxos, the music group, which is a larger thing. So collectively, we represent some 2.4, almost 2.5 million tracks of music. Not all classical, but the large portion of it is classical, quite a bit is. And if you're encountering, some of that music anywhere in the world, whether it's a television commercial perhaps, or a YouTube video, or you stream something on Spotify, or you buy a CD from Amazon, or you have heard some music in a hotel cafe or lobby or something like that, chances are someone on our team has had something to do with making sure that you heard it. And that's my role, and the role of many of my colleagues, is to ensure that classical music, which is largely what we do, and of course the Naxos label is entirely classical music, is has a seat at the table in any discussion. And there are obviously countless record labels throughout the world. We are the largest classical music group of any kind in the world, with a huge archive of sound recordings. And our focus, especially in the last few years, is on new markets, how people are consuming music, and where those people are, how the consumption models are changing all the time. And a big part of all of what we do is to ensure that when a music director or music supervisor is looking for music for a film, or a student is looking for something for their young film and they're in a film program somewhere, or whatever you can think of, that we have and can identify, and have musicologists and experts that can identify some of the tracks, some of the albums, some of the whatever, that can best program your whatever it is you're programming: radio station, film, television, YouTube video, project, whatever.
Oh, fantastic. So people can become members of Naxos? Is it or you work on a bigger platform? How does
Well, we have loads of businesses underneath the Naxos umbrella. So, if you're asking, there's no real membership per se, but if you're looking to license music, say for a project of some kind, there's a website, Naxos Licensing, excuse me, that one can visit, reach out to my colleagues to, get some help in identifying a track. It's kind of interesting how many music supervisors kind of put music last in their project, and they can make this, glorious thing or whatever. And then music becomes an afterthought, yet they have a very strong idea about what they want. And someone will come to us and say at, say, noon, and will request something like the following. I need 6 seconds of classical music, preferably orchestral, kind of Eastern European sounding, that starts quiet and ends at a real loud fortissimo, a real loud crash, and it needs to be 6 seconds, and I need it by 3:00. And so a lot of people have to try to identify, something within the catalog that might fit that if we want the work, if we want the project. And that kind of thing happens every day, sometimes several times a day. That's just one aspect of our business. That's Naxos Licensing. Naxos.com is arguably the most visited classical music website in the world. It's a huge educational resource. More people, arguably more young people, know us through the Naxos Music Library, which as a streaming service even predates nearly any of the other streaming services by a couple of years. It's been around now almost 20 years. And Naxos Music Library is used by institutions of higher learning throughout the world. And so there in the UK, most of your music schools have NML subscriptions. Most of the universities of any size have subscriptions. Many school departments at the primary school level utilize Naxos Music Library, Naxos Video Library, and Naxos Spoken Word Library to access huge part of the world's content in this area at the subscription level. We also have owned retail businesses in the physical space, Archive Music here in the US, Archive Jazz also in the US, HB Direct in the US, all of whom are dedicated to selling CDs, DVD, Blu-ray, vinyl to collectors and fans of physical music. We have a distribution company in the US, UK, and several other countries, handling shops and stores and websites that sell music. So, I mean, we have our fingers in a lot of different things. Ultimately, trying to serve the customer who's interested in classical music and trying to, recruit more people toward what we all love.
Yes, it sounds like a musical planet, really.
It is indeed. Yep.
Yes,
I'm very lucky.
And for our visitors, our listeners or viewers, we will put links underneath this video to different Naxos kind of projects and endeavors, so you can check them out. So now it's a fun part of our interview, because the idea was to offer people, each of us, 3 tips for developing their creativity during the lockdown time. And let's see, maybe sometimes it happened a couple of times that my guests and I, we came up almost with the same ideas, but why don't you start?
Sure. Well, we've given a lot of thought to this because, as I mentioned, we represent a lot of record labels, and we, on those labels, represent tens of thousands of artists in classical music. So nearly everyone you can think of in some way touched or affiliated with Naxos Music Group in some way. And we, during this time, are trying to be as helpful and as open and as communicative as we can with our partners, because we know, especially for any performing artist, I'm not a performing artist, but for anyone who is, we all know that every concert opportunity that you might have had on your calendar has been dried up and gone away. And that has huge repercussions, not only for performing artists, but for the institutions that would have hosted them and supported them. And a lot of them are really going, however long this, whatever this is, lasts, I mean, we're going to have a real rethinking and restructuring of a lot of societal things. And I think concerts are going to be a part of that. Fortunately, recording artists have lots of platforms that they could work on and deal with and address, provided they had enough time to do it. And many of them haven't had enough time because they're on airplanes and they're traveling to Beijing and, you know, Munich and London or whatever to play their next concert and very busy running around. Well, now is the time that if one has time to really update a lot of important things. The first thing I would say is, you know, focus on your socials. I have a very love-hate or maybe hate-love relationship with social media. And, but, you know, it is a necessary evil of our time as artists to really kind of communicate if not communicate our message, then at least information about what it is that we're doing. So people might learn about this video through your socials or mine. And it would just kind of exist in a vacuum, perhaps without it, or without some other form of advertising. So during this time, it's really important to update your socials as much as you can. It's a good opportunity to purge people that haven't been engaging, try to engage more on the platforms. For those that have been on Facebook and Twitter for years and haven't explored Instagram, now is a great time. Instagram has loads of opportunities that the other platforms don't have. TikTok, for whatever one thinks of it, is far and away the fastest growing platform ever, outpacing Facebook by a factor of 10. And, you know, it's Chinese-owned, Chinese-run company with offices all over the world. The content there is, you know, unique, and you might look at it and say, how is this applicable to me as a composer or a pianist or whatever? But that's where the creativity comes in. Maybe there is something, you know, there is a way. So I would say, you know, really focus, update your socials. Second thing is on platform mobilization. So big tech governs the way we listen to music mostly. And by big tech, I'm referring to Google, Amazon, and Apple. And I'm going to throw Spotify in there too. Even though they're technically not a multi-platform big tech company, they are such a, you know, dominant platform in the world of streaming music. But between those four companies, and YouTube falls under Google because Google owns them, you've got plenty of opportunities to, you know, update all of the information that you want in your various profiles on those platforms. So if you haven't explored Spotify for artists, now is the time. You should be viewing your dashboard every month, see where your listeners are coming from. Update your profile photos if that's something that you like. Share links directly. I definitely, we always do this, encourage composers and artists to build playlists and to share those playlists. And those playlists don't need to be my music or your music. They could be whatever it is you're listening to, whatever it is that you like, but your name's behind it. And maybe you slip in one of your tracks, or maybe half yours and half others. Or, you know, Spotify did a composer weekly profile on me about 2-3 years ago. And I just, you know, certainly centered around my music, but a lot of the things that really influenced me and shaped me, especially when I was younger, are in there. And some of the things I'm listening to more recently are in there. And that playlist got a fair amount of listens and shares, more than my individual albums have. So, you know, those kinds of things. Spend a lot of time on platform. The other thing, and this is maybe kind of point 2A or 2B, would be to, you know, within a platform, you'll see loads and loads of playlists that, for lack of a better word, might be called occasional music, occasional playlists. So music for studying, music for sleep, peaceful piano. And again, like I said before, yoga, breakfast, whatever the hell it is that you're doing. Music accompanies a lot of activities that people do, and maybe they're not involved in deep listening. The fact that they might listen to classical instrumental music while they're making breakfast or doing yoga, I think is a good opportunity. Look at your catalog and identify the stuff in one's own work that might fall into one of those things. I can tell you the difference between, you know, having a track, say Tear Garden track on an album in the system on Spotify or Apple Music or something like that is going to yield less than 1,000 streams per week, far less than 1,000 streams per week. However, inclusion into one of the more listened to occasional lifestyle-oriented playlists, mood-based playlists, can go up to 4, 5, 6 million listens a month. And now people are always going to ask me the revenue question. What does that mean in money? And it's a very complex question. I'd probably take an hour to explain some of that. But, the fact of the matter is that you can find new audiences by thinking about your work in that light, if you wish. A lot of artists say, I don't give a shit about anybody listening to my music while they're doing yoga, and that's fine. But, there are opportunities out there. I think digging into the dashboards deeply is very important. There's a lot of very, very interesting metrics out there. I'll ask you the question. Do you know what the biggest, how do I say this? The city in the world with the most streaming activity for pretty much anyone's music?
No.
Any idea? I would say London or New York or, I don't know, Berlin or whatever. Happens to be Mexico City.
Mexico City.
Mexico City, and it has been for a year or two. And they are my biggest market. I've never been to Mexico City. My Spanish is pretty poor. I don't know I know a few people there, but not many. There are a lot of people listening to music in Latin America and discovering a lot of different things, including, the work of classical music artists. And Mexico City happens to be the big, now it's second or third largest city in the world, so it's not all that surprising when you think of it, but it is quite interesting that it is a very mobile-centric market in the world. So anyway, that's what some of the in-platform engagement can kind of reveal to artists. A lot of people are surprised when I say that, when we talk about that, but it's evident if you're on some of the platforms. And then lastly, I would say just for those that are losing income and opportunity as a result of concerts not happening, there are loads of platforms and opportunities for live streaming concerts at home there in the comfort of your home. And we've happened to have done a lot with a number of Naxos artists, especially at a very small venue in Berlin with one engineer, one microphone, one camera, 2 microphones, 1 camera. A very, very successful YouTube series we've done over the last 8 or 9 weeks, I think, or so, called the Pavilion Concerts. But a lot of people are doing, some really great things at home, streaming them on Facebook, Instagram Live, Twitch, YouTube, all the various platforms. A lot of platforms doing a lot there. And at least you can get out into the world and share your art and share your work with others. A lot of people really like to see artists at home because, especially with a big star, you want to know, what does home look like for that person? What is their piano like, or what's their practice space like? And I find that kind of interesting too.
I agree. There's so much. Creativity still flourishes in different ways, isn't it, during this time?
Yeah.
I agree. My advice, because your advice is fantastic. I actually learned a lot myself. So after this, I'm going to go quickly on my Spotify and update my pictures because I realized they're from last year. Thank you.
Sure.
But other people, I know that some of our viewers are not music makers, music people who enjoy listening to music or come to my concerts or like concerts. So my idea is, first of all, because, and again, I'm judging even by myself as well as my friends, we tend to listen to the music we know because it gives us a sense of comfort, especially if we're not feeling that great, if our mood is down. But I think now, because we do have more time and we do have these amazing opportunities and access to so much more, I would say to people, find even 15 minutes a day when you say, okay, I'm going to explore something which I absolutely have no idea about, or something which I think I would hate, but actually I don't know how it's going to sound. Because I think people might be surprised and they might discover something completely new, and it's going to be very exciting journey for them. And then from 15 minutes, it might extend to half an hour, and who knows, so I think the first thing is just to be open to listen to something which you would not necessarily would want to listen in a normal life.
Terrific idea. And you can expand that to include reading things that you might not read, or doing things, or tackling some exercise that if you're a runner and you normally just run, and maybe you want to try yoga, or a certain amount of stretching, or reading something, learning about something, watching something, learning a language, all kind of opportunities. Sure.
Yes. Another idea I had, because many of us, when we were children, we wanted to, even children stroke teenagers, different times in our lives, we wanted to be someone, to do a doctor or an actor, or I don't know, to fly to cosmos and do different things. So again, because we now have the time, and basically all this represented kind of our creative desires, right? And some of them got fulfilled during our grown-up times, and some of them were not fulfilled. And so my idea would be first to try to remember who you wanted to be when you were 7, who you wanted to be when you were 10, who you wanted to be when you were 14. Write a list, and then ask yourself, would I still want to be that person? And if not, that you feel fine about it. But if you think, yeah, I would have, if only I went to that acting, if only I didn't give up that guitar, if only I continued with the piano. And I think now is a great opportunity. So if you did wanted to get to the piano, get to that piano now.
Yeah.
If you did wanted to try acting, look at some acting classes and try to act something, or read a monologue, or do something. Or if you wanted to paint, my goodness, try this. So I think it's a great time to kind of satisfy these desires. If we still have these childhood desires which were not satisfied, I think now it's the time to do it. What do you think?
Great advice. I agree. Yeah, I think there's so much that one could be trying and doing. My wife and I are obviously confined like everyone else, and so we go out on our walks, or I run most days, or I cycle. If I don't run, I cycle, and if I don't cycle, I run. But like a walk in the evening or whatever, we put on our masks and our gloves, like any sensible New Yorker. Not everyone, but most of them. And we go exploring, and it's amazing how much you can really notice and pick up just a block from your own home, and notice more about the vegetation or the flowers. Or I think I mentioned before about the birds who seem to be everywhere now and taking over. We've got hawks, there's vulture in the neighborhood. I mean, there's crazy stuff that may have been around the whole time, we just never noticed. And it's just been great to go explore some other areas that we haven't explored. And when I get on my bike, obviously you can go pretty far and fast on a bike when there's not much traffic on the roads. So, I mean, though I've lived in Brooklyn for 20 years, there's huge portions of it I've never seen and know anything about. And, I spent the weekend exploring a lot of areas, at least, going by on a bike that, were very, very interesting to me. I'd like to go back and explore again. It's just, I think you can find more and notice more during this time. And I like the idea of maybe painting, or, reading poetry, or taking a stab at writing and doing some of the things that, we might not normally do. It's great.
So my final tip is kind of a continuation of number 2, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like that. Because sometimes we think we want to do something, but we keep thinking, oh, I would love to do this, I would love to do this, but we actually never finish it, or we never do it. We just think about it. So this time, why don't we make a present, again, either for a friend or member of the family, and that present would be your creative endeavor. It could be anything from writing a piece of music, or recording little audio, or recording, again, a little acting thing, or even baking a cake. It doesn't matter. But the fact is that you are creating something in order to give to someone you love or someone you like as a present. Because I think that even would inspire creativity in them as well.
That's a beautiful idea. I love it. Yeah, I like that a lot. I actually had about 3 weeks ago, I had kind of a musical idea that I kind of worked out on the piano, and I wasn't really thinking about writing another piece of music or whatever, but I mean, the idea kind of came to me. It was certainly as a result of quarantine, and I titled a very short piece for piano called, I titled it Castle and Keep. And I ended up giving it to a friend of mine, pianist Laura Downs, a good friend of mine, and has played a lot of my music over the years, and a good supporter. I just gave it to her just to say, hey, I know we're all struggling and all that during this time. Hope you like it. Didn't think anything else of it. Well, she came back, I don't know, 2 days later, maybe 3 days later, with a recording of it that she made at home and emailed it to me. So it was ended up a present for her, ended up being a present for me too.
You see? You see?
Very nice. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for joining me. I'm sure this was fascinating. We covered so many topics. And again, all our viewers, I wish you to stay well, to be safe. And thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, please do leave them underneath this video, and I will endeavor to answer them as soon as I can. Thank you very much, and bye. And thank you, Sean. Bye.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.